Hello, my astrology friends. We continue with the 2023 marathon with one of the most anticipated guests, the incredible financial astrologer Sama, who will take us not just from 2023, but from to the next 10 years astrologically, what will happen with finances. I'm so happy you're part of this marathon, Sama. Hello.
Hello, greetings from Soviet America. Hope you're all well, comrades. Happy holidays. I
It's
hope
your
that.
turn now. It's your turn now to see what's like. Oh, our turn too, because we're also South American. Oh, wow. So,
Yeah, hopefully, the title will be enough of a trigger warning. There are going to be some heavy topics discussed. These are going to be world predictions. So personally, remember, you can have a great time. Some people have really benefited through the past 2, 3 years, even though the world is in chaos. So personal and world predictions, they're different, right? But in understanding what's taking place in the world, then we can benefit personally by just adjusting what our purpose is, what we're here to do with the natural flows of what's occurring. That's really the purpose here. So with that being said, it is the holidays. If you're not in the mood for a heavier kind of discussion, come back at another time. But if you're staying, let me just remind you too, before we start, that there is just as much good in the world as there is bad. We just don't always see it. So with that, I want to talk with you guys today now about some really powerful and extremely useful to know trends. You'll be able to apply them. You'll be able to apply exactly what we talk about today. You don't have to wait to do anything of it. You can talk about it with your families and your business partners and implement it immediately. And so during our first interview, right, we talked about, I said I would come back. We talk about whether we're going into recession or depression. And you'll be glad to know today we'll answer that topic. And so the timing opportunities with investments, I want you guys to use that. In consultations, we can talk about these things with me now if you want to book one-on-one, and we'll talk about how you can apply them. But even if you don't, the timing techniques revealed here will be very powerful. You probably won't hear them anywhere else. All right, so let's get into it. And did you give me the ability to share screen? Because I'm going to use that again this time.
yes, I will.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen. And one of the things that we'll look at is something that you guys probably haven't seen. And so is this sharing? Is this visible? Hold on a
Yes,
second.
it's perfect. Yeah.
Sure that this is not sharing right. Hold on. Is this visible?
Yes.
Okay. No, this is my Instagram. Let me move this out of the way. There we go. Okay. I'm on a different computer, so I'm a little disoriented. So this is the CBDC tracker. And I just wanted you guys to be able to see that there are places already in research. There are already places that have what are called a proof of concept. So they've passed the research phase and they're already looking at how their central bank digital currency is going to work, and they have proof already, right? And then there's places that have what are called a pilot, which is they're launching already their proof of concept. And then there's places that have it launched. All right, so this is called cbdctracker.org. And what you guys see is that there's a lot of places already in the world that are looking at this. Okay, so I just wanted you guys to be able to see that most of the globe is colored in here, and that we are moving to a phase of digital currencies. All right, so I just wanted you guys to be able to see that and know that part of what I'm talking about in the predictions, I've verified, right? I've looked at these things. And you guys can look at these things too. They just aren't publicized as much to you guys, right? And so I want you guys to be able to know that. So in terms of what we need to then cover, what's really important to understand is that in 2022, the market pretty much went in one direction, right? So next year, the trend is still down, but it will move up and down and all over the place due to social unrest. This will be due to war issues and currency issues getting much worse. And you'll be glad to know that we actually will not have a 1929 style crash next year, not in 2023.
Oh.
Now that will happen later. We'll talk. Will that happen?
It is coming. Okay.
We'll talk about that. But as for 2023, the US will finally admit that there is a recession in Q1. So Q1 will be weak, but once war picks up in Europe, that money is going to come to the US, right? This is part of what I get, the advice I gave people when we were talking about the potential crash in October when we last met, right? A lot of people were saying, is this it? This is the big crash. Some astrologers were even pointing out that the signatures of that full moon were pretty bad for markets, right? And we mentioned that Venus is there and that's going to protect and actually bring wealth into the US. That will continue when concerns of war escalate. So money will actually be going not into US bonds, though, not government debt in the US, but US companies. Okay, so they'll be buying stocks. So first thing, January is immediately a concern already. Okay, so there was an attempt to pull NATO into World War III around the time of the eclipse in November, right? By blaming damage of some shells that landed in Poland by Russia in November. That turned out to be false. Mars, we have in retrograde motion, probably to thank for that. But Mars will be moving forward in mid-January, and Mars is still out of bounds. For some reason, no one talks about Mars being out of bounds much. And Mars is out of bounds for a long time. And if you don't know what that is, that's like a planet being out of the kingdom of the sun, which means it's kind of able to do whatever it wants. It's going to be different in how it exerts or exhibits its behaviors than it normally would be, right? So with this out of bounds distance, Mars is unpredictable in what it can do. And the things that take place can be out of the norm. They're not usual. Mars is in Gemini. This is related to people. What have we noticed? There's no peace talks. They're basically non-existent. And so another thing no one really talks about much is Mars is in the 7th house of Gemini for the United States. Some consider Gemini to be the sign of the trickster. Mars is the god of war. We've talked about that. And Gemini is also related to currency. It's an air sign, so it's going to rule things that travel through the air, right? Communication, currency, the media, right? So some know that the 7th house can include experiences with open enemies, right? The 7th house is also related to allies, right? Partnerships. So stated a bit differently, this speaks of a proxy war, basically. America is using other countries to fight its battles. And America is also using its currency and its media to get what America wants. Mars gets you what you want. And so consider this fact. Mars also rules America's 12th house. And the 12th house represents faraway places and hidden things. America's military spends a lot of time in faraway places doing hidden things. That's just how the country works. So in short, when Mars is moving direct, in the charts that I've looked at for the US, for Ukraine, for NATO, Russia, Mars can trigger an event where things do escalate. It's not a guarantee. I hope it doesn't, but you're warned. January right away, mid-January is something to be just sensitive to, especially if you live in those areas, more in the, more in Europe and East Europe, around what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. So you've been warned. Then we have Saturn moving into Pisces and Pluto moving into Aquarius in March, all in the same month. At some point, Pluto in Aquarius talks about someone or something wanting to take control over the internet. It could be that if you don't have a digital identity, you don't get to communicate on the internet at all, right? It might be excommunication from the tribe. I'll talk more about Pluto and Aquarius more broadly in a little bit, though. Let's focus more on Saturn and Pisces for now. Again, there will be people, I'm sure there's going to be astrologers in this marathon that talk about the benefits of that on a personal level. So just keep that in mind. But in terms of world predictions, Saturn is authority and Pisces is endings. It's the material becoming spiritual. It's the last zodiac sign. So it's the end of this physical experience becoming more universal, becoming back to one, so to speak, right? Saturn is also the ruler of time. This will bring an increase in euthanasia. That is government-sponsored suicide or death. This, of course, will start with those that are really sick and those that are unwell, right? And where there seems to be a justification for that. And then it'll become more normalized in the sense that if a person chooses to do so, it won't be stigmatized. It's more of their right, right? And so you'll see this more in the Western countries. And it'll be one of those left versus right talking points that people get all crazy about. You'll hear one side saying it's good for the climate, actually, and the other side saying, I thought you were pro-life, blah, 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 division. You know how it goes. But there's going to be more death, plainly. Just sorry to say it, but you'll see people pass away. People will be passing away for Piscean reasons, right? There will be, believe it or not, this is going to sound crazy now, but there will be climate change, spiritual death cults where it's like they all drink Kool-Aid again and get poisoned together in a circle. And some will think it's honorable, that it's a cool thing to do. And we'll see it in the news, just like we see all these school shootings in America all the time. They'll just push that in your face that this is a good thing to do, right? So however you feel about that, that's up to you. I'm just here to give you the world predictions. So even on top of that now, I'm going to say something now, and I know you guys won't be closed-minded like some people out there in the world today, because really it's easy to completely separate the part listening closely and not actually doing the part that wasn't completely focused. So becoming completely open now with me, I'm just sharing the facts with you guys so that you can understand the prediction better. It was known going in at the beginning of these emergency release medicines that 1% won't do well taking that medicine, right? That's known with any of those programs. Bill Gates said that himself, and that's if they did their best job with the product. You'll have 1% that doesn't work well with, right? Supposedly this was done at warp speed, and some of the initial offerings that were available then, we know they're no longer available today because they were too dangerous. Some are still available, some are not. This is all true. Not trying to offend anybody. This is all true. So it's probably more than 1% that may have a bad reaction, but let's just assume 1%. Last I saw, 68% of the world had at least one dose. That's over 5 billion people. 1% of 5 billion, that's a lot of people. We're talking about millions of people. And maybe it's not 1%, but let's assume it is. One of the common side effects is myocarditis. That's not going to be bad for everybody, but the survival rate, they say, is 80% in year 1. But then when you go to year 5, it's like 50%, right? So for some, it's going to be mild. And for some people, it will be ending their life in a matter of years. So vitally important point, a lot of people did that for humanity. They did it to see their family, to go to their favorite restaurant, to see their loved ones. A lot of people did it to do something what they thought was good for society. And that's why we all were told to do it. Pisces, as the last sign, talks about sacrifice, talks about compassion, talks about universal love. Saturn moving into Aquarius is saying, what is your duty or responsibility to the community? So this isn't a lot of the themes that helped influence people's decision-making and why these are even topics for us to be experiencing as humanity as a whole collectively right now. So again, when Saturn moves into Pisces, what that will then mean then is people will pass away for Piscean reasons. So this stuff may have been rushed, and with 1% being an accepted percentage of who this won't work well for, nothing works well for everybody. So when Saturn moves into Pisces, unfortunately, he will say, thank you for your sacrifice to some people. On top of that, we will have food shortages. That's going to lead to bad nutrition, and that's going to lead to more disease. And I'll talk about the timing of that later. So just hang on to that for now. Sorry if this is too heavy, but hang in there. We have the whole decade to go through. And look, you guys can correct me in the comments. This is not about me. It's just about reading charts and communicating what's right, because that's what does the most good for the most people. With me, you understand that now, because I have to say, divide and conquer, it just works too damn well on us human beings. So I try to avoid that game whenever I see it. I just tell you what's coming. I make suggestions, and you're free to make your own decisions. So let's talk about war. I'm sorry, but we'll see a lot of global civil unrest in 2023 when the North Node enters Aries. Politicians will become crazy with war, and people will revolt. They're already revolting, but this will only increase, right? So we talked about what the North Node is, right? We know that that's the expansive side where we're pulled, right? We use the word karma a lot when, especially when we're talking about Vedic astrology. Karma is just cause and effect. Cause and effect is always taking place. But when we talk about the nodes, there's this feeling that there's an intense pull of cause and effect that we must pay attention to. So that is what we mean when we say that the nodes are karmic. They're destined, right? They feel fated. The cause and effect must be dealt with. And so that pushes of cause and effect of all the events we're seeing now is moving into Aries, which, as we talked about last time, in Vedic astrology is considered to be the battlefield. It's the first sign. It's fire, and it's cardinal fire. So it's the most fiery of energies, the most fiery that fire can be. And it's about survival, right? Our first breath is Aries. We're trying to live, right? So Aries is the battlefield. Cause and effect is shoving us into our independence and our ability to try to live, right? So that also then means the South Node is in Libra, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's going to be really interesting, considering all that I've said, is in the US in particular, how are the democratic people, and also in Western countries, when I say the West, I'm also including the parts of Europe that are supported by the World Economic Forum, right? So what's going to be really interesting is how there's a lot of people who are genuine peace-loving people that want the best for the environment, and they are clearly being manipulated. Everyone's being manipulated on both sides of politics, right? So don't get what I just said twisted, but how are they going to be convinced that nuclear war with Russia is the only way to save the world? That's going to be interesting to see. This might even actually split the Democratic parties and split other parties across the world. Again, Mars is in Gemini currently. And for the US, this talks about the weakening of alliances, right? But I want you guys to pay attention to that. Watch between now and 2023 how people's attitudes change towards war, right? And then when the South Node is in Libra, what happens? So the South Node is contraction, it's excretion, it's ending and letting go away of letting go of things, right? So Libra is an air sign that talks about diplomacy, peace. It's ruled by Venus. Venus is harmonious, opposite of Mars, where Mars is more the god of war. Venus wants peace. Venus wants to bring us nice things that we enjoy. It wants harmony, generally speaking. But the South Node then will contract that or reduce that or waste that away in the sign of Libra. Diplomacy is dying then, right? We saw when, for example, the South Node went into Sagittarius during the time of 2020, what happened? Sagittarius rules things like schools, churches, universities. Those things were shut down, right? So we're going to see diplomacy get shut down. We're going to see governments shut down. The 2024 election is going to be a disaster in the US and in other parts of the world too. I don't think anyone's going to accept it. It doesn't matter who wins. If that's something you care about, I would suggest voting in person, but really it doesn't matter. Putin's up for re-election in 2024. He may not do it because of health from what I've looked at in this chart. Zelensky's up for re-election. Biden's up for re-election. It's going to be a crazy year for elections all across the world. No one's going to be happy. That's usually the case with those things anyway. So it is what it is. What my fear is that it might be the final year for elections, 2024, at least in the US specifically. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about why either in another video if you guys want me to do that more. 2024 to 2028 is likely to be civil war. We'll talk about that when the time comes. Let's prepare for 2023. I feel like some of you guys think I talk about the US too much, so just let me know in the comments if you want that, or if I should just put that on my own channel, I'll do that. But I'll do what the majority of you guys say. So I think by, I think by now, most of us know about the World Economic Forum. I talk about them quite often, and the Great Reset agenda plans, all that stuff. You've talked about them quite often as well. But what you guys know about it is only half the story. So here's the secret. Communists believed that communism only failed because they didn't have the United States and Europe completely involved in it as well. So the Great Reset is basically a worldwide attempt at communism 2.0, but forced by technology. So here's what the typical person watching the news doesn't understand. Most US politicians have been compromised either through blackmail, this, that, or the other thing. They're basically made to make sure they comply with the goals of the World Economic Forum. If they haven't been compromised, it's still very difficult to get your goals through. I'm talking about the majority of US politicians. This entire climate change agenda is to push for one world government at the United Nations, the UN, at which we'll have no right to really vote over anything across the world. This is a push for one world government. So they will say that if we just had one world government, lockdowns would have worked better. We would have actually got rid of things in 2 weeks because we would have been able to actually control everybody. Now, whether or not you agree with that, that's up to you. You'll be able to choose sides. I'm just here to tell you what's coming in advance. So like I said in my last video, globalism is dead, right? You need globalism for economic growth, like what we've seen in the 90s to continue, but that's over. Russia got kicked out of the global economy. So other countries looked at that and they said, why should I invest in another country if another country can just say your money's no longer good here? So things are no longer going to be the same, both for the world, for diplomacy, and then that also means the world economy, right? So you're not just going to have these booming markets where everyone's just trading stuff across the world. And on one hand, everyone's not just going to be making all these cheap plastic products to sell to America. We do need to, at some point, evolve and grow up spiritually and do other things, right? But things won't be the same. And this is not going to end nicely because China and Russia will say, no, I'm not playing along. They will defend their right to be sovereign nations. So here's the big secret. Here's what they won't tell you. And if this video gets pulled down, it will be because of what I'm about to say right now. So I'm going to break down the climate change wars. Here's the strategy. The big game plan they won't tell you is step one, you take over Russia. That should be obvious by now after what I've covered. Why Russia? This gives you control over the biggest provider of oil and gas to food and food to Germany and the EU. 50% of Russia's wealth and their money comes from natural gas and oil. So what do? You call it dirty. You say it's bad for the environment. You tell all the youth that don't understand the political chess games that you're playing that Russia needs to be destroyed to save the environment, right? And if you actually do take over Russia, then what happens? You scare the shit out of China. Then you say, oh, look, actually, China's the worst polluter, everybody. Let's take over China too. So that's the Great Reset they're not going to tell you about. And that is why the conflict in Ukraine will not end. So if this video disappears, I apologize, but this is what the West is up to. One world government ruled by unelected officials by 2030. Klaus has
but can I ask something? Russia and China's officials are not elected either, so it's whether it's one type of tyranny and another.
Right. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. And so, but these people, Russia and China, they're not going to want to give up their control to this one world government. So that is why we're going to see this conflict escalate. And there's going to be a lot of countries that say, especially if Russia and China can maintain their strength and win here, they will say, well, I'm just going to partner with them. I don't want to join the West. I don't want to join Klaus, right? So this is why it becomes a world war issue. You have these two dividing lines that some will support, saying, I don't want to join the West, where others will say, I want to join the West. It's really, each nation is going to go their own way with it. The ones that have debt issues, I can tell you, are most likely going to side with the World Economic Forum, because Klaus is saying, well, Well, I'll get into that in a little bit. But I hope that explains what you see in the American media, people. These guys are just mafia bosses fighting for territory. The players may change, but the game is the same. There's nothing new under the sun. It's always been like this on this planet. Sorry, but I know we think we're different. But when I look back in history, this is what we see. And so I hope that explains what's going on in the media. The US is a puppet. The World Economic Forum is using the power of the US to destroy the world and then blow up the US. And then they will emerge as a one world superpower that runs everything. That's really the plan.
Yeah.
I think they'll be successful. Let's keep unpacking this.
For a bit.
Exactly. Yeah, you just said it. So for a bit, and then it'll fall apart because it never works. So the first phase of this, I talked about a little bit when we first met, right? That I talked about how in 2019, before things shut down, American banks didn't want to lend money to European banks anymore. And that caused a break, and that had to be fixed. And then we had 2020. Now we're in a time where we lose confidence in governments, right? So this is where we all get affected financially. And the trouble is they know that the confidence in their money is dying. And so how are they going to react to that? They're just not going to pay. So just like Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all them, is just, we're not going to pay, right? The US has been running a deficit in their budget since the Second World War. They're never going to pay back their debts, ever. So this is why countries who have debt problems are listening to Klaus and the World Economic Forum. He's saying, you don't have to pay them back. You just join the New World Order. It's fine. We'll give them a new digital currency. Don't worry about it. Right. Exactly. And like we saw in the Europe video that I posted on your channel, people's pension funds, what are they linked to? The security of their governments. But since now we have a crisis in government security, what happens? If those currencies break, pensions break, what are all those people in retirement going to do? They're going to go back to work? No, they're going to be upset. They're going to blame the government. And so if they respond and they say, here's universal basic income in the form of a digital currency, are people going to complain as much? So that's where Pluto and Aquarius comes into play. It'll bring universal basic income in the form of a central bank digital currency. We just need you to have a digital ID and a social credit score and a health passport to make sure we send the money in the right place and to make sure you deserve it and that you're a good boy and a good girl and all that kind of stuff, right? So this is likely going to happen first in Europe before Saturn ends its transit through Pisces. It'll be supported with Pluto and Aquarius. It could be as early as the second quarter of next year, in 2023. I have big concerns about the time period of mid-April all the way through the end of May. So 6 or 7 week period for the world in general. That would be pretty chaotic. And if some of these digital things start to get released with these ingresses of both Saturn and Pluto, don't be surprised. Right? So I know that's a lot there, but I think we only went through the January and March. I should probably speed up, but they're not going to pay back their debt. We talked about food shortages. That's going to lead to a disease cycle. That's also going to justify universal basic income. What you see in China right now, guys, is what they want to repeat and what will basically be the peak of when disease is the worst and malnutrition is the worst. I see that more in 2027. I see more airborne viruses too. And then they'll be able to really control. What they want to do is control the food supply and the medicines and the injections you have to take. So it's very likely there will be more lockdowns in 2027 and 2028. We'll talk more about that later. Pluto and Aquarius, one quick thought on China. That's an Aquarian nation, you guys. So they can grow in power by the time Pluto has left Aquarius, right? So right now you see China's power being taken away, right? But by the time Pluto is done, we'll see a much stronger China, right? And Pluto will end its transit in 2044. But basically what you guys see there happening there is what they want to implement in the West throughout the day in terms of the control and the technology, right? So Pluto and Aquarius, though, by the time it's done, like you said, they'll only succeed for a little while, guys. This is going to fall apart. It's not going to work, right? Pluto and Aquarius says that power has to leave in terms of when it's in Capricorn, it's top down, Big boss issues the order. In the world that we live in now, you don't even see who those people are, but the order is issued. Eventually, some president says it, and then it disseminates down, right? Pluto in Aquarius is going to say, we need to break that up, right? You guys are going to split into smaller tribes and smaller communities, okay? Countries are going to be more isolated. So that's what I mean when I say globalism is dead. There's going to be more localized trade. It's not going to be all this stuff across the world. There will be cyber attacks where people's bank accounts can get wiped out. This might get blamed on war or Russia. It's just going to be another, you know, if you're using a central digital bank currency to this, we talked about how that can eliminate debt, but that the sensitivity of these currencies is something to watch as you go into war as well, because if the power grid is down, how can you use these things? So by the time Pluto in Aquarius leaves, we will realize that the second version of communism, with more countries included this time, even, it still didn't work, right? And so we'll see these smaller tribes actually very successful, very blooming, and actually contributing new forms of energy, technology, and new ways of living. We just need to go through, you talked about the Pluto archetype a lot on your channel, so I know people get this by now. It will take power away before it restores it. And this is a long transit, so we just have to be patient with this. That's all. All right, so let's talk about Jupiter. Yeah.
The social rape, what can I say?
Yeah.
Well, patience.
Patience.
Well, what do you think if just the personal, and so as a financial person who understands the workings of the big money, if someone refuses basic income, you know, if they have some other source, what happens? Do they get excluded from society, or will it, there'll be a way out of this, for at least for the ones that want.
Right. So the first thing I want people to understand is that this is more a problem in countries like the US, Canada, the EU, Australia, New Zealand, and those that are their allies, right? So these are the places that are really going to have to deal with these issues the most. This isn't going to be the biggest problem everywhere. Some nations are just, again, the world is becoming smaller. People are going to say, no, we're not going to deal with the world as much. So there's some nations and places across the world that they're just going to do that, and they're going to mind their business and carry on. So this isn't going to ruin everyone's life to that degree. There will be these small tribes and communities. So what we're going to see with this decade is a lot of migration, right? Everyone's wanted to come to America for so long, but by the end of the decade, we'll see, well, there'll be a lot less people, which we've already covered, but we'll see people going more into rural areas. We'll see people more, there's a lot of land in America that's untouched. We'll see people shifting out of the cities and going into that in some way, shape, or form, right? There's actually an article they put out, the World Economic Forum, years ago, saying life has changed. We have smart cities now. I can rent everything. Life is beautiful. I only feel bad about those people that they just didn't want to go along. They're not a part of this. They live outside of the city. I wonder what's happening to them. And so that's what people are going to do.
Poor peasants.
Well, that's what they'll think. That's what they might think. Well, that's what they might think in those communities, about those communities. But the truth is, Pluto is going to give people's power back. So there's technologies that have been suppressed, right? There's use of water, propulsion energy, magnets. There's things that, I'll even get into it. When Uranus moves into Gemini, there's going to be technologies that you'll be able to use sound, you'll be able to use voice or frequencies to manipulate the world. There's going to be a lot of technology that these small tribes or groups actually are free to implement because they'll be outside of the system, right? So we'll actually see, again, by the time Pluto leaves Aquarius, these little tribes and communities will really change how we live. It'll make the world a much better place.
That's the best news you gave us. I love hearing it from you.
Yeah. Just think of it this way, down then up. That's all. We just, like you said earlier, patience. So let's talk about Jupiter. That'll lighten it up too, right? So Jupiter has strength in Taurus. This is probably the one astrological aspect out of all the ones this decade that I'll be talking about that we have to take advantage of if we want to make any money. Now, with me, how different would it be if things didn't even change or if nothing else really did? So that's why I've decided, from the feedback I've really been getting, that I'm offering a newsletter with monthly regular predictions. And one of the main focuses of 2023, and that will be to help people grow as much wealth as they can to benefit from this conjunction. This is when we will see the peak in commodities. So commodities, oil, gold, the metals, lumber, the things we build with, oil, right? Food. This is when we're going to see a peak in that. That's going to be, you guys want to listen to this, in Q2 of 2024. That's going to be the top, right? So people are saying, when's the market going to go up? When's the market going to go up? That's the sector you want to be in, and you want to be there until 2024. You want to be there before this conjunction.
That
right?
doesn't mean though hyperinflation of prices of those things.
That's why you want to be there.
All right.
Right? This is really going to affect nations outside of the US. The dollar is going to be strong. Some countries will be affected by this, but hyperinflation in the dollar will not be taking place in 2024. Not that, so the dollar won't be breaking, right? But in terms of what you need and what you need to accumulate, when we talk about commodities, this is going to affect and destroy other nations, not the US. People will become greedy, and they will start accumulating then around that second quarter of 2024. I'm telling you guys now, because that's the benefit, is you can start preparing now. You can start accumulating now. Start stocking your pantry now, right? Because shortages, that's what is going to cause that boom, right? And this is going to bring a series of world challenges. But, you know, the last time Jupiter was conjunct in Taurus with Uranus, there were conflict in the Balkans with Greece. Russia was actually winning battles. We might see similar things again, right? But again, you guys should be positioning yourself to benefit from this. There will still be markets, and you can still make money. I know this might sound cruel to some people, but you have to take care of yourself. So at a minimum, you should be stocking food, and it would be very beneficial for you to have investments in oil, gold, silver, lumber, the metals before that point. Okay. This will also, 2024 is going to really bring in the air economy, right? 5 outer planets changing signs. They're really going to be predominantly in air and fire signs. So that those are the businesses and industries ruled by air and fire that you want to be in, right? We'll get into more specifics in other videos. It's already been an hour, so I'm going to try and speed up here. So with Jupiter conjunct Uranus, you know, digital currencies will be, I showed you guys a graph that's going to be more expansive, right? I could see the British pound being digital at this point. The euro will be down before the pound, in my opinion. I could be wrong about that, but that's the way I see it. Neptune is going to move into Aries. That's going to be really good for spiritual transformation and a lot of delusion. You know, that is you know, when Neptune was in Pisces, this is what really kicked off a lot of the roots for this communistic flavor or flair. This was the same thing in the 1840s, right? And that also led to a gold rush back then too. We're going, these are the seeds that are being sown for gold to expand and commodities to expand as well. When Neptune enters Aries, the first time Neptune entered Aries in 1861, it was the day it happened was the official beginning of the Civil War in America. I believe Civil War will return to the US within the next 3 years. Like I said, you know, I think the 2024 election may be the last one in the US. So I think Civil War could be coming after that. I know I said I was going to talk about the US too much, but do you have a question or comment?
No, I'm just like, I just recorded my 2023 video and I speak for a few years ahead, and it's like we're doing this, we've done the same video. I'm saying exactly.
Oh my God.
Great to hear it confirmed, like, yeah.
Yeah.
See that others see the same. So wonderful. Not wonderful, but I mean, exciting times we live in.
We do live in exciting times. That's the old proverb, right? May you live in exciting times. But it's cool to know that we have some confluence there in what we're seeing. Uranus and Gemini. So let me speed up. 2025, digital IDs will probably be implemented. Digital currencies, we've talked about that. We'll get a taste of that energy, you know, I think it's July to November 2025, then it'll come back and be more consistent from 2026 all the way till 2032. That could be when we actually see people saying enough of these digital currencies is at the end of 2022, when Uranus leaves Gemini. We might actually see that. Right. I don't necessarily think
When
money's
does
gonna
it reach?
show
2030?
Yeah, 2032 is when Uranus will leave Gemini. So I think at that point, people might say, I don't want to touch digital currencies anymore. We might. So again, you guys, these things will fail. Times come and times go, right? There should be really severe food issues between 25, 26, 27, because that's when we get Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries. That's a new cycle. That is going to be the true beginning of communism 2.0, as I call it. You know, the world will never be the same. There's a disposal outside. Sorry about all that noise. But yeah, so 2026 is really going to begin that new cycle. We're going to see smart cities done, right? So they're going to be using facial recognition. There's going to be all the technology you see in China basically will be a lot more prevalent in these Western countries. So digging was going to be big. Fiber optic, cable, tech, all that stuff is going to be a huge sector to invest in if you want. You know, AI is going to be a big sector as well. They will be using AI to replace the police. You know, though in the West, they'll say no more of this police brutality against this race, that race. We'll just have AI do it. All right. So all these phones and devices we're using that scan our eyes and all that stuff, all that technology will be implemented to keep a safer world. Right. Pluto will be in Aquarius. Right. So the old saying in that old book, you know, Big Brother is watching. I don't know if it's 1984 or which one, but yeah. So AI will do that. AI is I know definitively AI is reading the transcript of this video. We all have social credit scores. Sorry. I know you think that's all in China, but everyone's is dropping as you watch this. I apologize. But AI is doing that.
With the bottom feeders here.
Yeah, mine's probably very low. Every person, place, thing, your desk, your dog, they'll all be tracked. They'll have, you know, this will be done through sensors, right? So AI and Pluto and Aquarius, it wants data. So if you want to invest in sensors or cameras or technology that picks up data, you'll make a lot of money. You can do that if you want. Let me share my screen again. That didn't go so well last time, but let's try it again. Let's try it again. I was going to pull up an image, you know, we're already gone over, but basically, I'll link it in the comments. It's an image that shows you all of the different means of access that a digital identity will actually, what it'll actually get you or get you access to. Because we live in a world, I'm actually going to pull it up. We live in a world where everything basically, you're assumed you just have access to it, but you're going to need to show this identity in these places to actually get access, right? So you want to open a bank account, let me see your digital ID, right? You want to come into the hospital, right? We already saw versions of this in the past few years, right? You don't have the jab, well, maybe you shouldn't come in, maybe you should die at home is what some people were saying, right? So similar in the sense, if you don't have the ID, you might not get access to healthcare, right? If you don't have your ID, you can't go in the grocery store, you can't get a phone, your taxes will be done automatically through that. That's, you know, rather than doing them the way we do now, I think that's going to be easier. I actually think that that'll actually be easier for people because taxes are really annoying.
Yes.
It's so stupid. Like yeah, let's not get into that, but I think that'll actually make taxes easier. But this is just an example of what you'll get access to with the digital ID. You basically already have access to all these things now normally, but the change will be, let me see your digital ID, then you get access. Okay. So that's going to be the shift, right? What else?
Should we resist that or should we let it? It means just literally living somewhere outside of the whole civilization, or should we participate because anyway it's gonna eat its own tail one day. What do you think?
Well, so there's always a middle road to walk, right? And I think that so for someone like myself, I will be walking that middle road. If I have to use central digital bank currencies to pay taxes or bills in the US, that's what I will do. But again, we're using this information to build wealth and to make investments that will benefit us as well. So I'm not going to keep all my wealth in that system because that's a tracked system. So we need to think dualistically in the sense of everything that I want them to see, then that I'm fine with them seeing, can be here, and everything that I want outside of that can be kept outside of that, right? This will increase things like foreign bank accounts, probably, if that nation is willing to have you store wealth there, because one sovereign cannot be in the business of another sovereign's wealth and assets. They do it anyway. They're all spying on each other, but they're not supposed to be in other people's business like that. So me as a US investor, if I had property in Bulgaria and business going on in Bulgaria, that's really none of the US's business. So you'll see people doing more of that. How do I keep my wealth or my business or things that I don't want a Western government that is doing this stuff to see?
So most of the richest people in the West will have things in Russia.
Oh, you already see that now, right? You already see that now, right? Cayman Island banking, or like I talk about Sam and the crypto guys in the Bahamas and stuff like that. So money will just move around. Money will go where it's treated best. It always does, which is why I'm able to say, hey guys, it's going into America because there's war, right?
So be as like the Bible says, be as humble as a dove and as smart as a snake. don't stir up shit, but extract the best out of the situation smartly.
Yeah. So yeah, all of this stuff, again, Pluto and Aquarius, it's not about what's good for the individual, it's about what's good for the community, right? So that's what the people in power will say about the digital ID, medical interventions, subscriptions for medicine, water, carbon credits, all that tied to your money. You're not behaving, they can push a button, your taxes go up, so you'll have to basically unlock your life if you want to live in such a city or world, or you'll migrate and you'll move. So again, we'll see a lot of people moving. I think a lot of the astrologers who do astrocartography will have a busy decade. So
I think when Uranus moves to Gemini, the moving goes crazy.
Exactly. It's gonna go crazy. It's gonna go crazy. Yeah. Let me share my screen again now that I have this figured out. Just shift this here. Doesn't seem to be working. Try this again. I want to share with you guys what's known as the McWhirter theory of stock market forecast. There we go. Hopefully this is sharing now. So this is on my actual Instagram. It's kind of hard to read, but I'll explain it. This is Leo. Down here we have Aquarius, and this is the cycle of the nodes. This is about 19 years, Lada. I know you know this, but more for those of you who aren't familiar and can't really read it this well. This says normal. This says above normal. And then this goes back to normal. And then this says below normal. And so the idea is, as the nodes pass through these signs, the business trend overall throughout the world will follow, right? So the North Node, where is it now? We noticed it was in Gemini, which was in the normal sector, right? When the market was last up. It moved into Taurus, and that's when we could see videos on my channel, me saying, hey, the market's going down in 2022, right? We began going from normal to below normal. And when we get into the North Node in Aquarius, that is when we see basically the bottom of the market financially. And then we start to trend upward until we once again get the North Node in Leo later on in the future. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. You guys can also look at that again in any depth if you need to on my Instagram if you're interested in that.
Well, that means it's a good idea to invest when the North Node is around Capricorn, Aquarius, then what's, those signs there below at the bottom of the chart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And that is actually going to line up with basically what we're saying here. And this video spans from 2023 to 2033, right? That is going to be a part where also too, I talked about this in the first video we did together, Saturn and Uranus, right? That's when Saturn is going to be conjunct Uranus and Gemini. That begins a new cycle. That, in my opinion, is when we realize that communism stuff just did not work. Let's start again, right?
So before, Saturn with Uranus, approximately?
Saturn conjunct Uranus and Gemini, 2032. Right? This is the end of this 10-year period that we're talking about now. But before we get into that, let me finish with the North Node. That's going to be the lowest period. The North Node will be in Aquarius from August 2026 to March 2028. There's a lot of signatures for a recession, and just that this is going to be a deep bottom in the market. That's definitely the time to buy commodities again, and a lot of things related to tech. So metals, the electrical components, in particular copper, that's going to go for insane prices 3-4 years later. Jupiter will be opposing Saturn between 2019 and 2029 and 31. That's going to be the peak. Then we crash down at the bottom or at the end of 2032, Saturn conjunct Uranus and Gemini, and then we start again. So during those last 3 years, especially 2030 to 32, that is when we see the big hyperinflation. You don't want to necessarily buy stocks during that time. You want to have already bought, like you said, when the North Node is in Aquarius and Capricorn, right? Because then 2031, 2032, when hyperinflation is going crazy, all of us will just be selling stuff and not being caught up in the hype. So you don't necessarily want to buy stocks in the hyperinflation. You want to be getting out because that means things are breaking, right? And that's going to be the end of that system, the smart cities and the communism and all that. So let's summarize. So I actually have a summary for you guys as well that I'll share, because I know that was a lot, and people tend to miss all of that in the sense of all that's been covered, because when all these different topics are shared, it can kind of be hard to remember. So you guys can take a screenshot of this. I will even post a picture and image of it in the comments of this video. Just to summarize, money is going to be moving into the United States because of war internationally. I actually didn't talk about this much. There's going to be a solar minimum. I called this the climate change wars. So this is going to actually, because the sun is actually producing less of its rays and it's going through a cycle between now until the 2060s, we will see unpredictable weather, a lot of rain or dryness or drought, depending on where you live. This is going to be until the 2060s. This is also what's affecting the food shortages. Okay. This will be blamed on climate change. But another thing I also didn't mention too is the ozone layer is actually in a very sensitive position. So if we do go into nuclear war, we will actually have real environmental issues that are not a joke. So that is why this video is called the climate change wars. Volatility, civil unrest, you guys know, will be par for the course until the end of this cycle, 2032. We talked about the elections. We talked about commodities up until 2024, then down in 2028, and then up at the end of the hyperinflation. Food shortages will be the same. Saturn will conjoin Uranus at the end of 2032, and that is when the new cycle begins. So that is the summary, you guys. I hope that was helpful. I know that's a lot to digest and to talk about. You know, the journey into communism will not last. You know, people, the world will say, it didn't work, let's try that capitalism thing again, right? Who wants to buy stocks, right? That's what we're going to do. China and Russia will not accept these things. So that is why we're going to go into war. You know, I talked about coming out with a newsletter before. I don't really have any offerings to pitch you guys. I don't really have anything to sell. I've gotten some amazing feedback from the More Money reading. You know, that tingly feeling you get behind your eyes. I've gotten some of that. You know, I didn't design it to do some of the things that it's doing, but people are already making job changes that are really going to benefit them when the North Node moves into Aries. So I just want to thank you if that's one of your pieces of property now, that More Money reading. It hasn't been available since the eclipse because I've been working on the release of the single thing that people have been asking me the most is those regular predictions on the market, currencies, crypto. So you're finally going to get that. Those of you who have been asking, I'm going to release that newsletter on the 5th of February. It's going to include summaries like the one I just posted, so you have the bullet point information. Might even do some Q&A. I haven't decided on that. All of you here will obviously get a discount. Some of you won't need it. You know, Jupiter conjunct Uranus will bless some of you anyway, right? But some of you who you feel that your time is the most important asset, you know, no one ever sees everyone who decides to have exactly what they want, or people who do what's acceptable. You know, some people don't really think above the crowd and all that kind of stuff. So some of you will actually benefit from that. You'll save your time. And I'm also going to give what works and all the different methods behind how these predictions come about. So if you want to jump into that, you know, you can go to my website, thefinancialastrologer.com, and join the free newsletter. You'll get notified when the upgrade is available. You guys can add me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, whatever you like. It's all up to you guys. I don't know if there's and then talk about Bitcoin really quickly. I could touched on this a little bit with the power grids, if you guys didn't catch that. We're going into a decade of war. One of the most basic, simplest forms of military strategy is you bomb the power plants, you bomb the power grid, you starve them out, right? War, when it's done well, actually doesn't fire any bullets. It's very covert and secretive, like what you actually see, right? People don't just go jumping, killing each other. That's not good. It's more insidious and more secretive than you guys realize. So you start with the power plants so that people have no power. And then if you're dealing with electronic currencies, then can you operate them? And that's part of the reason you attack a power grid, is you disrupt people internally. You need electricity to use digital currencies. And Uranus tells us that there will be disruptions. It's a disruptive planet. So as much as I personally believe in the ethos of Bitcoin, let's say, I would not make it a large percentage of my portfolio. I've already covered Bitcoin in other videos. It will never be the same. It's not going to go do crazy prices this year because of what you guys know now with globalism. I've covered that. No market is going to do crazy prices except commodities and a few others in tech, which we'll talk about in other videos. So make no mistake, Bitcoin is competition to the government. They don't want a digital form of money competing with theirs when they have digital money to give you. Why would they want that? So if you want to know about other crypto in general, watch the other videos. I talk about that in depth. But yeah, we have nothing else for you guys. I'm sure that's enough. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sama. That was incredible. Again, I absolutely love your insights. They presented in very easy to understand way. And again, if anyone would like a reading with Sama, I'll put the link below. You can connect with him straight. And yeah, looking forward to what else is coming out, and to your predictions coming out and your newsletter. Thank you so much, Sama.
Thank you, everybody.
Great 2023. Let's be the ones that benefit from that year.
We need
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Bye-bye, everybody.